Keith Lowe's The Fear and the Freedom: How the Second World War Changed Us, 2017, is a sweeping historical and socio-political analysis of the long-lasting effects of World War II. Unlike traditional war histories that focus primarily on military campaigns and political leaders, Lowe explores how the war reshaped societies, economies, ideologies, and individual lives. He examines how the destruction and trauma of the war created both fear and hope, driving the world into an era of immense transformation. This book is not just a historical chronicle, but also a meditation on the human condition in the post-war world. It argues that World War II did not simply end in 1945, but left psychological, political, and cultural legacies that still shape our lives today. Lowe combines academic rigor with engaging storytelling, drawing on personal narratives, primary sources, and scholarly analysis to present a nuanced understanding of the war's global impact. Themes and structure. Lowe structures The Fear and the Freedom, thematically rather than chronologically, dividing the book into sections that explore different aspects of the post-war world. He moves between personal stories, historical events, and broader philosophical discussions. The book is filled with testimonies from survivors, political leaders, and ordinary people, giving it a deeply human element. The central themes of the book include 1. Trauma and memory. The war left behind a world deeply scarred by violence. Cities were in ruins, millions were displaced, and entire societies had to rebuild themselves. Lowe examines the psychological trauma that individuals and nations faced in the aftermath of the war. He also explores how different countries chose to remember or forget their roles in the conflict. 2. Fear and the Cold War. The book argues that World War II directly led to the Cold War. The division of Germany, the ideological battle between capitalism and communism, and the nuclear arms race were all consequences of the global conflict. The war had given birth to a new kind of fear, one of nuclear annihilation and ideological warfare. 3. Freedom and decolonization. Lowe explores how the war accelerated the fall of European empires. Former colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East gained independence as European powers could no longer sustain their imperial control. However, this process was not always peaceful, and the wars of independence often echoed the brutality of World War II. 4. Economic and social change. The war led to major economic transformations. It paved the way for the economic boom in the United States, the reconstruction of Europe through the Marshall Plan, and the creation of welfare states. Social structures also changed, particularly in terms of gender roles, as women who had worked during the war fought for greater rights and freedoms. 5. Science and technology. The war drove scientific and technological progress, particularly in nuclear physics, medicine, and aerospace engineering. Lowe discusses how wartime innovations, including the atomic bomb, changed global politics and everyday life. Number 6. Ideology and human rights. In the aftermath of the Holocaust and other war crimes, the world saw the emergence of human rights as a global concern. The United Nations and institutions like the International Criminal Court were created to prevent future atrocities. However, the Cold War often undermined these efforts as superpowers prioritized their ideological battles over justice. The psychological and emotional legacy of the war. Lowe's analysis of the psychological and emotional impact of the war is one of the book's most compelling aspects. He delves into the experiences of survivors, whether they were Holocaust victims, Japanese civilians who endured atomic bombings, or soldiers suffering from PTSD. Their stories illustrate the long-lasting consequences of the conflict on individual lives. For many, the war never truly ended. Survivors of concentration camps, prisoners of war, and displaced families carried the scars of war for the rest of their lives. Lowe discusses how governments, particularly in the West, often ignored or minimized the psychological trauma of veterans and civilians. In the Soviet Union, for example, returning soldiers who had been captured by the Nazis were treated with suspicion rather than sympathy. At the same time, the war inspired hope and progress. Many people believed that the horrors of World War II had taught humanity a lesson, leading to movements for peace, democracy, and human rights. The European Union, for instance, was founded on the idea that economic cooperation could prevent future conflicts. The war's role in shaping the modern world. One of the book's key arguments is that many of the defining features of the modern world can be traced back to World War II. The Cold War, globalization, the rise of superpowers, and the civil rights movements were all shaped by the war's outcomes. The war fundamentally changed the balance of power in the world. While Britain and France emerged weakened, the United States and the Soviet Union became the dominant global powers. This led to a world divided between two competing ideologies, capitalism and communism. The fear of another world war, this time fought with nuclear weapons, shaped international relations for decades. The war also reshaped national identities. In Germany and Japan, for example, the war forced a complete reevaluation of their histories and political systems. In the United States, the war reinforced the country's self-image as a defender of democracy, even as it struggled with racial segregation at home. The complexity of liberation and decolonization. While the end of World War II is often seen as a moment of liberation, Lowe complicates this narrative. For many people, the post-war years brought new forms of oppression and conflict. Eastern Europe, for example, exchanged Nazi occupation for Soviet domination. In Asia and Africa, independence movements faced violent suppression from colonial powers. The war had given many colonized peoples hope that they could fight for their own freedom, just as Europe had fought against Hitler. However, the reality was more complicated. European powers were reluctant to give up their colonies, leading to bloody conflicts in places like Algeria, Kenya, and Vietnam. Lowe explores these struggles in detail, showing how the war's legacy was not just one of freedom, but also of continued struggle and resistance. A balanced and thought-provoking analysis. One of Lowe's strengths is his ability to present a balanced perspective. He does not romanticize the post-war world, nor does he paint it in purely negative terms. Instead, he acknowledges both the progress and the new challenges that arose in the aftermath of the war. He highlights the contradictions of the post-war era, how the war led to both the expansion of democracy and the rise of authoritarian regimes, to both the birth of the welfare state and the deepening of the Cold War. Lowe's writing is accessible and engaging, making complex historical developments understandable to a general audience. He seamlessly weaves together individual stories with broader historical analysis, making the book both informative and emotionally powerful. Conclusion. Keith Lowe's The Fear and the Freedom is a compelling and insightful exploration of the ways in which World War II shaped the modern world. It goes beyond traditional military history to examine the war's psychological, social, political, and economic legacies. By focusing on the experiences of ordinary people as well as global leaders, Lowe provides a deeply human perspective on one of the most transformative periods in history. The book is essential reading for anyone interested in understanding the long-term effects of World War II. It challenges simplistic narratives and provides a nuanced view of how the war created both fear and hope, destruction and progress. Whether one is a historian, a student, or simply a curious reader, The Fear and the Freedom offers valuable insights into the world we live in today.